Welcome to The Debate. Our discussion today, it emerges from a really profound synthesis of prophetic and apostolic texts. We're looking at Isaiah 35, Psalm 145, James 5, and Matthew 11. Now, these passages all get at the expected Messiah, and I think the very nature of salvation itself. And there's a tension here, a real one. Does this material primarily instruct believers to recognize the, let's say, already realized liberation through Christ's works? Or is the core mandate really about the necessity of enduring patience while we await the final fulfillment of the kingdom? I'm going to argue that the material overwhelmingly emphasizes the definitive, present reality of God's liberation, proven irrevocably by the works of Christ.
And I'll be maintaining that while we absolutely have to acknowledge those works as the proof of Christ's identity, the primary imperative for the lived day-to-day experience of the faithful is actually focused on patient endurance, on moral vigilance. And this is essential because the final advent of the Lord, while certain, is delayed, and our faith has to be tempered by that duration.
My position is really rooted in Isaiah 35. It offers a radical redefinition of divine intervention. You have to remember, the prophet is speaking to people who are panicked, they're despairing during the Babylonian exile. And to reassure them, he announces this coming retribution of God. But, and this is key, Isaiah clarifies immediately that this vengeance isn't directed against humanity. It's directed against the evil that afflicts humanity. So, it signifies immediate positive salvation. The terrified are given courage. The deaf hear. The blind see. Captives are set free. This concept is cemented in the term redeemed, which in the biblical sense really just means liberated. It's deeply connected to the Jewish tradition of the kinsman redeemer, the Goel, where God acts as the closest relative to intervene and free us. And Jesus, well, he confirms this fulfilled state in Matthew 11 by quoting Isaiah. His works, the healing, the good news to the poor, they show that this liberation is happening now. The whole mood is one of joy, of certainty.
I see why you think that. And I agree, the works of Christ are undeniable proofs, of course. However, when we look at the lived experience of the believers that the apostles are writing to, the central reality is one of prolonged waiting. I mean, think about the historical context for a second. 50 years of the Babylonian exile. That's long enough for people to completely lose heart. And this temporal struggle, it's mirrored in the early church's experience with the delayed return of the Lord. The letter of James confronts this head-on. James insists, not once, but 4 times, on the need to take patience, to hold firm. Why? Because although the Lord's coming is near, the waiting is real. So this frames the Christian life not as a single instantaneous event, but as a kind of marathon of faith, a course requiring long breath. The need to settle into this duration proves that faith has to be forged through time, through endurance. I mean, why else would James model this on the farmer waiting for the rains, or on the steadfastness of Job? And furthermore, the fact that ultimate judgment is postponed, it's reserved for God alone, the judge is at our gate, that mandates a period of restraint. We have to actively hold back from judging one another, which to me clearly indicates that the human heart, even the redeemed heart, is still fallible. It's not fully transformed yet.
Okay, let's focus on that, on the implication of Christ's works, because I think this is where the fundamental shift, the real tipping point of human history occurs. The list of works Jesus cites: healing physical suffering, curing moral afflictions, raising the dead. This serves as just irrefutable evidence that the core message, the Word made flesh, has permanently broken the old order. Think about the scene in Matthew 11. John the Baptist, the greatest prophet, is in prison and he still has doubts. He's asking, should we await another? And Jesus' answer is simply, look at the works. The logic is definitive. So the least disciple of Jesus, just by living after this fulfillment, by knowing the prophecies have been enacted, is already greater than John the Baptist.
Right.
And their superiority isn't moral goodness. It's about living inside the realized promise. The Messianic age isn't just anticipated anymore. It's now fully functional in the world.
That's a very potent argument, I agree, especially regarding identity and proof. But I would frame the function of those works differently. I see the works of Christ as providing the necessary credential for his identity, yes, but they don't eradicate the enduring temporal reality of spiritual struggle, of internal bondage for his followers. I'm drawing on Psalm 145 here. While physical healing is part of it, the psalmist applies these metaphors to something deeper, to spiritual transformation. God opens the eyes to other kinds of blindness, the blindness of pride, of self-righteousness. God loosens the chains not just of iron, but the chains of hate, of jealousy, of judgment within the community. And this deeper transformation of the heart, that is absolutely gradual. If we were fully liberated, instantaneously remade, why would James spend so much time stressing the spiritual discipline, the training required to sustain patience and charity?
We are still deeply embedded in this duration before final redemption. We still struggle with these more insidious forms of spiritual blindness that require constant moral vigilance. And that is the essence of endurance.
I think you might be confusing the certainty of the transformation with the time it takes for an individual to internalize it and live up to it. The shift has happened. The gates of the prison are open. The question is just whether the prisoner walks out.
They are instantly gone. And that brings us right to the meaning of time and delay. If the liberation is truly complete, why is duration even a factor? I come at this by focusing on the historical reality of these lengthy struggles. 50 years of exile led to profound despair. Similarly, the early church struggled with the delayed return of the Lord, and it led to infighting, to moral laxity. The sheer necessity of telling people over and over again to hold firm, to strengthen your hearts, as James does, and do not complain against one another. That implies the liberation is not complete in its subjective effects on the community. If it were instantaneous, why the repeated emphasis on this long breath? The command to endure suggests the journey itself, the process of becoming sanctified through time, remains paramount.
See, I'm not convinced that the need for patience implies doubt about the arrival, or for that matter, incompleteness of the initial liberation. I'd argue the historical context, the exile, the waiting, it serves as a crucial teaching mechanism, a path of revelation designed to show God's true nature as a God of profound mercy. This patience isn't about uncertainty. It's the endurance you need to grasp the sheer magnitude of the guarantee. The final destination, the return to Zion, that's what fundamentally matters. Isaiah 35 doesn't dwell on the hardship. Instead, he describes the return as a grandiose procession. He paints this vivid picture of the desert flourishing like Lebanon or Carmel, regions known for their beauty. This description emphasizes the certainty and glory of the final event, regardless of the distance traveled. So patience, in this light, is just the faithful endurance required to witness a guaranteed triumph. It's the time needed for our character to align with a promise that is already certain.
That theological framing of patience is compelling, I'll grant you, as alignment rather than doubt. But it still requires the focus to remain on the process of endurance. If the destination is what fundamentally matters, why does James focus so heavily on the means? Not swearing, not grumbling, not judging. He's making sure the community survives the duration without imploding. The very fact that the process is so morally challenging indicates that the full transformation, which would negate these internal struggles, is still awaited. If we focus too heavily on the realized aspect, we risk minimizing the spiritual danger that's inherent in this prolonged wait.
But that risk is precisely why the practical mandate for the believer has to be active imitation. If we're created in the image of God, and God is the Goel who decisively intervenes to save, then our practical application must be to actively imitate that saving action. The source material strongly suggests that each time we intervene for an unfortunate person, we reflect the image of God. Our resemblance to God is demonstrated when we allow our deep compassion to be activated by suffering. We have to actively hasten the day of God's reign. I'm reminded of that sentiment from the new believer who asks why Christ doesn't just multiply the loaves today, and then realizes perhaps he is counting on us to do it. That understanding calls for immediate, outward expression of mercy and justice. To focus only on internal restraint is to misunderstand the active nature of the liberation accomplished. It demands a response from us now.
I agree completely that mercy is essential, but I strongly disagree with the implication that our mandate is to hasten God's reign through a primary focus on external action, especially if that comes at the expense of internal moral restraint. That unqualified focus on action, it risks usurping God's exclusive role as judge. James explicitly warns us against setting ourselves up as judges of others. He says it is not our job or vocation. We are told not to speak ill of one another. We risk confusing the good grain and the weed, because the judge alone, well, he looks at the heart and not the appearances. The critical endurance required in this delayed time is intellectual humility and charity. And that's characterized by not judging or speaking ill of others. This is mandatory precisely because we are in this duration, and our fallibility means we risk becoming a spiritual occasion of stumbling for others. This restraint prevents us from becoming the very obstacle to the kingdom we claim we are trying to hasten.
But the judge being at the gate should be a galvanizing force for justice, not an argument for paralysis through overcaution. The justice we're called to enact isn't judgment of the heart. That is absolutely reserved for the Lord, but the correction of societal injustice. Isaiah 35 is explicit. When God's vindication comes, weak hands are strengthened, feeble knees are made firm. That is a call to physical, practical intervention. If we only wait and restrain ourselves, we are allowing the very evil that Christ defeated to continue unchecked. The kinsman redeemer acts decisively, and if we bear his image, we must too.
And I do acknowledge the urgency of that call to mercy. But the core tension that James addresses is that the failure to wait patiently leads directly to internal conflict, the grumbling and judging within the community. He sees the danger of the already overwhelming the not yet. If the liberation were truly definitive in its moral impact on us, we wouldn't need constant warnings against usurping divine prerogative. The spiritual blindness that Psalm 145 addresses, the inability to see past one's own pride, that is the constant risk during the wait. Our active work in mercy must be constantly filtered through the lens of humility, knowing that our understanding of who deserves help and how it should be given is still profoundly flawed. The patient James demands is a spiritual mechanism that holds our flawed human action in check until the perfect final judge arrives.
In closing, I'd say the readings taken together provide a profound certainty. The messianic promises concerning redemption and total liberation have been enacted through Christ's works. The blind truly see, the deaf truly hear. This accomplishment fundamentally shifts our understanding of God's active nature. Therefore, the necessity of patience is rooted not in existential uncertainty, but in the faithful endurance required to fully live out the consequences of this realized liberation. This requires us to be actively engaged, working to imitate the God of compassion whose very being is activated by suffering. The certainty of the Redeemer's action demands our urgent and active participation.
And I would say the critical contribution of these texts is that they provide a necessary balance. While the nature of God's vindication is positive salvation, the timing of the definitive final kingdom remains an ongoing existential challenge. The enduring lesson, reinforced by James and the example of Job, is intellectual humility and charity. We must recognize the necessity of the long breath, restraining ourselves from judgment while simultaneously affirming the unwavering hope that the final judge is indeed at the door. This juxtaposition requires the believer to manage that complex tension between recognizing the freedom we have received now and sustaining the moral, patient expectation of the final glorious advent.